What if I told you that the Democrat frontrunner for California governor just collapsed from first place to dead last in the polls after getting caught on camera screaming at staffers and storming out of interviews? That California is now staring down a $12 billion budget deficit after giving free health care to nearly 2 million illegal aliens, and that Republican early voting in California has surged 11 points since the last election and is now nearly tied with Democrat early voting for the first time in modern history. Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. Something is breaking inside the California Democrat machine, and it is breaking fast. For 30 uninterrupted years, the Democrat Party has held total, absolute, unchallenged control over the state of California. 30 years. 3 decades of one-party dominance where elections were not competitions, but coronations. Where accountability did not exist because the opposition was too weak to demand it. Where every progressive experiment imaginable was imposed on the population without consequence because the people in charge knew they could never be voted out. And now, after 30 years of building a progressive utopia that turned out to be a catastrophe, after 30 years of policies that drove businesses out, priced families out, burned neighborhoods down, and flooded streets with homelessness and fentanyl, the bill has finally arrived. And the people of California are looking at that bill and deciding that they are done paying for it. If you believe that 30 years of one-party rule has destroyed what was once the greatest state in America, and that the people of California deserve better than a political class that screams at reporters, gives free health care to illegal aliens while citizens cannot afford gas, and lets entire neighborhoods burn to the ground while the mayor parties in Ghana, smash that like button right now. Every click helps us spread the word that even California is waking up. Because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how Katie Porter went from the inevitable Democrat nominee to a national laughingstock in a matter of weeks. What her collapse reveals about the fundamental rot inside the California Democrat Party. How California's progressive healthcare experiment exploded into a $12 billion disaster that even Gavin Newsom could not sustain. Why Spencer Pratt is now leading in the betting markets for Los Angeles mayor and has outraised the incumbent 10-1. Why Steve Hilton is running a credible polling leading campaign for governor, and what the early voting numbers are showing that has the Democrat establishment in an absolute panic. Now let me tell you about Katie Porter, because her story is not just about one bad candidate. It is a perfect, crystallized example of everything that is wrong with the California Democrat Party. Katie Porter was the left's great hope. The UC Irvine law professor turned progressive congresswoman who became the most beloved figure on MSNBC. The embodiment of the credentialed progressive elite. The woman who was supposed to ascend to the governor's mansion and continue the progressive experiment that California's ruling class has been running for 3 unbroken decades. The betting markets had her odds of becoming governor at an astonishing 40%, nearly double her nearest competitor. Every mainstream media outlet declared her the inevitable Democrat nominee. She was the anointed one, the chosen successor to Gavin Newsom's Sacramento throne. Destiny itself, according to the political establishment, had selected Katie Porter to lead California into its progressive future. And then October of 2025 arrived, and the real Katie Porter showed up. During a Zoom call with the California Department of Energy, Porter was caught on camera screaming at a department official. The official had stepped into her camera frame, and Porter erupted. "Get out of my shot." The official tried to offer a policy correction, and Porter cut them off. "Stay out of my shot." The fury, the contempt, the absolute disregard for the person she was speaking to. It was all caught on camera, and the Department of Energy knew it happened and tried to scrub it from the public record. They edited it out. They protected her. Because the progressive establishment had been shielding Katie Porter from the exposure of her own character for years, but they could not shield her forever. Because then came the interviews, and the interviews were even worse. During a sit-down with a journalist who asked her about the 40% of California voters who supported Donald Trump, Porter was asked whether she thought she needed any of those voters to win. Her response was not diplomatic. It was not strategic. It was dismissive and hostile. And when the journalist asked follow-up questions, as journalists do, Porter lost it. She said she did not want to continue. She said she did not want this on camera. She said she was going to call it. She threatened to end the interview because the reporter was doing the basic job of asking follow-up questions. The journalist pointed out that every other candidate had completed the same interview without issue. Porter's response? She said she did not care what other candidates did. She said she was running for governor because she is a leader. And then she walked away. Think about that for a moment. A woman running to lead 40 million people cannot sit through a standard media interview without threatening to walk out because a reporter asked follow-up questions. A woman who wants to govern the fifth largest economy on earth considers it an affront to her dignity to be asked to clarify her positions. A woman who presents herself as a leader demonstrated in the most public way possible that she cannot handle the most basic requirement of leadership, which is being questioned by the people you serve. And her polling collapsed. Not gradually, not in a slow decline, it cratered. She went from first place at 40% to single digits, from frontrunner to tied for last, from inevitable nominee to political punchline, in a matter of weeks. Now here's where most commentators would stop and say, what a shame about Katie Porter's temperament, and move on to the next story. But that would miss the real story entirely, because Katie Porter's collapse is not about one candidate having a bad month. It is a symptom of something far deeper, far more systemic, and far more consequential. Katie Porter was not a deviation from the California Democrat Party. She was its most perfect expression. The arrogance toward voters who disagree with her, that is California Democrat governance. The fury at being held accountable, that is California Democrat governance. The belief that if you have the right credentials and the right ideology, you do not owe explanations to anyone. Not to reporters, not to staffers, certainly not to the 40% of your state that voted for the other side. That is California Democrat governance distilled to its purest form. 30 years of one-party dominance does this to people. 30 years of never facing a competitive election. 30 years of never having to explain yourself to anyone who might disagree. 30 years of being completely insulated from the consequences of your own decisions. It produces politicians who genuinely believe that being questioned is an act of hostility. Politicians who view accountability as an inconvenience. Politicians who think leadership means never having to answer for anything. Katie Porter did not fail because she had a bad week. She failed because she is the inevitable product of a political system that has not required competence, humility, or accountability from its leaders in 3 decades. She is what happens when a party stops earning votes and starts expecting them. Now let me show you what 30 years of that mentality has produced, because the state of California right now is a rolling disaster on every measurable front. Let me start with the healthcare fiasco, because this is the one that perfectly captures the progressive cycle of grandiose promises followed by catastrophic failure followed by quiet retreat. Governor Gavin Newsom made California the first state in the nation to offer free, full-scope health care to all low-income residents regardless of immigration status. Every progressive in America cheered. The New York Times wrote glowing features. Democrats across the country pointed to California as the model for what they wanted to do nationwide. This was the crown jewel of the progressive project. By 2025, nearly 1.7 million illegal migrants had enrolled in the program. And the costs, which progressive economists had solemnly assured everyone would be manageable, exploded. They did not just exceed projections, they obliterated projections by billions. California found itself staring down a $12 billion budget deficit, driven in large part by a healthcare program that was giving free coverage to people who were not even supposed to be in the country. And here is the part that should make every progressive in America choke on their talking points. What did Gavin Newsom do? The governor who championed this program. The governor who stood at podiums and declared that healthcare is a human right regardless of immigration status. The governor who positioned himself as the moral conscience of the progressive movement. What did he do when the bill came due? He cut the illegal immigrants off the program. He froze new adult enrollment for illegal migrants starting this January. He imposed monthly premiums on those already enrolled. The California state legislature, which prides itself on being the most progressive governing body in the Western Hemisphere, quietly approved the rollback, because the policy they had championed as a moral imperative became such an obvious and embarrassing fiscal catastrophe that they could not afford to keep paying for it. And while all of this was unfolding, the Trump administration hit California with what it called the largest ever federal Medicaid funding freeze, $1.1 billion in Medicaid reimbursements suspended over fraud concerns in California's home health program. The state that was supposed to show America what progressive governance could achieve is now in the midst of a full-scale fiscal collapse that has been 30 years in the making. And who pays for it? Not Katie Porter, not Gavin Newsom, not the progressive policymakers who designed these programs. The regular people of California pay for it. The people who have been voting Democrat their entire lives because they were told it was the compassionate choice. People paying $7 at the gas pump. People watching their neighborhoods transform into open-air homeless encampments while their elected officials debated the proper language around unhoused community members. People who watched the Pacific Palisades burn to the ground while the city of Los Angeles had already cut the fire department's budget by $17 million and redirected the money to homeless services, while the mayor was partying in Ghana. These are the people who are paying for 30 years of progressive governance, and they are done. Now let me show you the evidence that the people of California are finally turning, because it is showing up everywhere you look. Start with Los Angeles. Spencer Pratt, the former reality TV star, announced his candidacy for mayor as an independent. The entire political establishment laughed. A reality TV star running for mayor of the second largest city in America? It was treated as a joke, a publicity stunt, a celebrity vanity project that would flame out in weeks. Except the voters did not laugh. By March, Pratt had rocketed to second place in the polls. The betting markets now have him surpassing incumbent Mayor Karen Bass. And the fundraising numbers tell the most devastating story of all. Pratt has raised nearly $3 million for his mayoral bid. That is 10 times what Mayor Karen Bass has raised. 10 times. The incumbent mayor of Los Angeles is being outraised 10-1 by a reality TV star. And it is not because Pratt is a celebrity. It is because Karen Bass has been one of the worst mayors in the history of Los Angeles. And in a city that has had some truly terrible mayors, that is saying something. The voters looked at the wreckage of her tenure. They looked at the Palisades fires and the gutted fire department budget. They looked at the homelessness and the crime and the fentanyl and the tent cities. And they decided they would rather take a chance on a reality TV star than extend the benefit of the doubt to a Democrat establishment that has demonstrated beyond any possible doubt that it cannot govern. Now look at the governor's race. Steve Hilton, a policy-focused, solutions-oriented Republican, is running a credible polling-leading campaign for governor of California. Not as a protest candidate, not as a fringe figure making a symbolic stand, as a legitimate frontrunner with real support and real momentum. Hilton talks about the issues that actually affect the daily lives of Californians. Gas prices, cost of living, housing affordability, the business exodus, the education collapse. He talks about these issues in terms that resonate with ordinary voters who have been priced out, burned out, or simply worn out by 30 years of progressive mismanagement. He does not lecture. He does not condescend. He offers solutions that make sense to people who are struggling to survive in a state that their government has made unaffordable. And the early voting numbers tell a story that should have the Democrat establishment in a full-blown panic. In the last comparable California election cycle, in 2022, at this point in the early voting, Democrats had cast 54% of the early vote. Republicans had cast 26%, nearly a 2-to-1 advantage. That is what normal California looks like. Democrats dominating the early vote by massive margins because the Republican opposition is too demoralized and too outnumbered to compete. Look at the numbers now. Democrats have dropped to 42% of the early vote. Republicans have surged to 37%. That is a 12-point drop for Democrats and an 11-point surge for Republicans compared to the same point in the last cycle. The gap has gone from 28 points to 5 points. In California, the bluest state in America, when Democrats go from a 28-point early vote advantage to a 5-point advantage in the span of one election cycle, something fundamental has changed. That is not a polling fluctuation. That is not a turnout anomaly. That is a structural shift in voter behavior that reflects a deep and growing rejection of the party that has controlled the state for 30 years. And the shift is being driven by the people who have been hurt most by progressive governance. Working families who cannot afford gas, small business owners who have been regulated and taxed into oblivion, parents whose children attend schools that rank near the bottom nationally, residents of neighborhoods that have been overrun by homelessness and crime, people who watched their homes burn while their mayor was on another continent. These are not Republican activists. These are not political partisans. These are ordinary Californians who have finally reached their breaking point. And when ordinary people in the most reliably blue state in America start showing up in the early vote at near parity with Democrats, something historic is happening. Now, let me bring all of this together, because the Katie Porter collapse, the healthcare fiasco, the Spencer Pratt surge, the Steve Hilton campaign, and the early voting shift are not separate stories. They are one story. The story of what happens when a political party holds unchallenged power for 3 decades and produces nothing but failure. Every institution that the California Democrat Party built over 30 years is cracking. Their credentialed candidates are collapsing under the weight of their own arrogance. Their signature policy achievements are imploding under the weight of their own cost. Their incumbent mayors are being outraised 10-1 by outsiders. Their hold on the governorship is being challenged by a Republican who is leading in the polls. And their domination of the early vote, the one structural advantage that has kept them in power cycle after cycle, is evaporating in real time. 30 years of one-party rule, 30 years of progressive experimentation with no accountability, 30 years of treating 40% of the state's voters as if they do not exist. And it has all led to this moment. The moment when the people of California look around at what has been done to their state and say, enough. Katie Porter's collapse is not a personal failure. It is a metaphor. She is what happens when a party stops caring about competence and starts caring only about credentials. When a party stops listening to voters and starts lecturing them. When a party stops governing and starts performing. She is the face of a political establishment that has been so insulated from accountability for so long that it cannot handle the most basic question from a reporter without threatening to walk away. And the voters are walking away from her the same way they are walking away from Karen Bass, the same way they are walking away from the California Democrat Party itself. Not reluctantly, not quietly, but loudly, publicly, and with their wallets and their ballots. Maybe, just maybe, there is hope for California after all. Don't stop here. The California primaries are days away and the early voting numbers are shifting by the hour. Click on the next video and join us as we continue to cover the most consequential election cycle in California in a generation, and the growing movement that could finally end 30 years of one-party rule in the Golden State.